Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's show. I'm Kelly Wright. And it's Friday, right? Thank God it's Friday. Well, one of the things we're going to do today for my opening observations, I'm going to take you outside just to look at what's going on in terms of how people are dressing here in the state of Maryland. And some states are open, as you know, they're reopening for business, and that leads to some frustration. And yet there are other states like this one in Maryland that's closed. So I've gone outside. It's a rainy afternoon, but I wanted to show you, to give you a glimpse and some perspective of what people are doing to safeguard themselves. Over my shoulder, you can see that people are lined up at a local grocery mart, and they are, like me, wearing masks because that is the order that we go outside, and when we do, we have to wear masks. It is very important that each of us realize that we have an obligation, and that is to safeguard ourselves and our families. No matter what you're doing, it is the new normal, and of course, I've talked about that quite a bit on this show. You can see this couple here unloading their groceries in their car. It is something that has taken some getting used to in the state of Maryland, and the governor has decided so far that he will not reopen the state of Maryland, and that he will continue to put safety measures in place for the protection of all of us, our loved ones, our families, our friends. Extremely very important to do just that. And so as we continue to sound the alarm here on the Kelly Wright Show about how this is impacting so many lives, it's important for each and every one of us to practice everything that we're being told to do, to wear a mask when we go outside. And I thought I'd come out and show it to you. And those are my opening observations. Welcome to the program. Joining me now is my guest, Dr. Yolanda Hancock. And for those of you who have watched us regularly, you know that she is in particular a regular guest. I enjoy everything that she talks about because she brings the truth, the medical truth, the gospel truth. Doc, good of you to join us today. You've been doing a lot of studying and research on this COVID-19 pandemic, and you can say it with authority that something is amiss with how this coronavirus transmits itself.
Absolutely. That's one of my biggest concerns, is that we're still not clear on how COVID-19 is transmitted. We already know that it's transmitted through respiratory droplets, person-to-person contact, and coming into contact with those respiratory droplets through surfaces. But recent studies coming out of Wuhan that haven't even been published yet, I don't consider the Business Insider to be my journal of choice, but certainly they do vet their stories. The study that will be published in June demonstrates that a family of 10 in Wuhan were infected through the air conditioning system at a restaurant in China. So that confirms what we've been concerned about since the beginning of this pandemic, that COVID-19 can become aerosolized, meaning that it can travel through air conditioning systems, through vents and ducts. And when we're considering reopening cities and states, particularly when you look at the states that are getting ready to open, Texas, Georgia, Florida, hot states in April, the humidity is already happening, air conditioners are on. If we do not know for sure how this virus is being transmitted and do not have a system in place, we continue to put people at risk.
We're hearing so many different things.
Right.
And
Right.
the messaging is so helter-skelter that it makes you wonder what's happening out there.
Absolutely. So for healthcare providers, clearly we need the N95 masks because we are in contact with patients on a regular basis. For the average American, using a cloth-based mask, you can do that, but you have to use some sort of filter system in it, because if you wear it for a prolonged period of time, I have a cloth mask, and after an hour it's moist. That will actually attract virus. Because fabrics are designed to be porous, virus can pass through. So it's important to use with the HVAC system, the filters that you put in there. Tear that chicken wire off, use that filter material to place inside the fabric. Use a shop towel, the ones the mechanics use to wipe off the dipstick. If you can't find either of those, layer up 3 coffee filters. You want to make sure that you put some barrier in that it provides additional protection from COVID-19. because we're so misinformed. I mean, even the CDC said to just use a bandana. There have been studies to show that using cloth by itself actually puts you at increased risk. So it's imperative that you use some sort of a filter inside that cloth mask.
Dr. Yolanda Hancock, I've got to ask you one more question. You were talking about the CDC giving out some information as well as the World Health Organization. You're right there on the front lines of public health. Have some doctors been in research so long that they've forgotten what's out on the front lines and what health professionals are facing with this pandemic when they're dealing with it up close and personal to try to save lives, at the same time risking their own life? Because it's sad and pathetic that we're seeing doctors and nurses cry because they're losing loved ones, and crying because they can't go home because they're on the front lines of this pandemic. Is it just that serious, and why are we not getting it?
It's absolutely that serious. I have colleagues, and I try not to, when I talk about stuff like this, it's hard not to get emotional. I have colleagues who haven't held their children in 2 months because of fear that they will spread COVID-19. I have, for myself as a pediatrician, it's a blessing that children aren't as impacted as adults with COVID-19. We still see cases, but I am not as inundated and involved. I say I'm on the front lines in the periphery, but I have colleagues who are there in ICUs, on hospital wards, in the emergency department every single day, still without the proper PPE. There are nurses who are now standing up for themselves and picketing because they are not being provided with PPE. And our hospital systems are still being overwhelmed in the face of states considering reopening. It's a slap in the face to healthcare professionals for that to even be a consideration, given how much risk we take in protecting all of us.
And you said the same thing about young doctors, residents who are not yet out of school. They haven't graduated yet. And obviously, one can applaud their courage and their willingness of heart to go in to this and face it. But then many of the residents are also succumbing to this.
Absolutely. I think it's the blessing and curse of particularly being an early physician. We feel like we're heroes. That hero is a blessing and a curse because we take risk. We go out to save lives, particularly early in your career. You want to do what you can. You made a commitment. And part of that commitment is putting yourself at risk even before you earn your first full paycheck as a full-fledged physician. This is the future of medicine that's at risk, that's at stake. And the more we expose patients to COVID-19, the more demand it puts on our system. And it calls for our early trainees to come out and step on the front lines with us, and it puts them at an incredible risk.
Dr. Yolanda Hancock, I appreciate you always being a part of this program and always putting out the truth that people need to hear. And certainly, I hope people who are watching this are taking heed to what you're saying, from the president on down to the person at home just trying to make ends meet. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We'll be back with more of the program after this. Welcome back to the program. I'm joined now by legal analyst Terry Austin. Always a pleasure to have you on, Terry. There's so much to talk about. Will we ever get through this COVID-19, and will we be able to maneuver through the legal minefields that are obviously developing as a result of this? Before we get started, I want to ask you, how are you doing? Because you're there in New York.
Thank you so much for that question. I'm doing fine. I'm making sure that I stay inside, and when I go outside, I am protected. I have everything on, and my family is safe. So thank you for asking.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that, because I know it is not easy in New York. It's been the place of so much tragedy because of this COVID-19, and yet New York is populated with a lot of immigrants, both documented and undocumented, and thereby that creates a problem for the system. I want to touch upon something that you sent out to me about how President Trump said he would sign an immigration executive order. Terry, with that, can you help us understand what this means, what this proposal means for immigrants?
It's interesting because President Trump mentioned it on April 20th. Then he discussed it a little bit more on the 21st. He actually signed the executive order, and it calls for a suspension of immigration for 60 days. And basically, it's suspending green cards. But it's really a distraction, Kelly, because for all intents and purposes, there's already a pause on immigration. All of the field offices are closed and the applications are not being processed. So you have to think, why is President Trump doing this at this time? He mentioned the wall during his press conferences, and he also thanked the Mexican government for supplying 27,000 soldiers. If you recall, during his campaign, he talked about the wall and he talked about Mexico paying for the wall. So some people think this is a distraction and that he is really talking to his base, because it doesn't really change what's going on right now with COVID-19.
I'm concerned about this because not far from you in the Brooklyn district is Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. And most of her district, as she told me on this program, would be immigrants and people of color. And this executive order going into effect right now, you can imagine what this is doing to the families that are already dealing with the incredible odds against them because of COVID-19, and the fact that Brooklyn is such a crowded, populated area, and these immigrant families are living together in small apartments. What does this do to them? This is a distraction, yes, but it's also a painful distraction for them as they try to figure out, what do we do now?
Well, that's exactly right. Any hopes that they may have had to reunite their families or bring their relatives into the country, those hopes have now been dispelled, because they may as well not even apply at this point because of this official ban. In the past, it might have just been a slower process, but now they really are going to be prohibited from coming into the country. And that's going to be difficult. I think, to your point, the fact that we're already dealing with COVID-19, protecting ourselves, making sure our families are safe, it's going to be much more difficult when families are not able to be with their loved ones and to be together as a family.
I'm talking to Terry Austin. She's our legal analyst here on the Kelly Wright Show. We're going to come back with more of Terry as we talk about some other factors that are out there that are raising some legal questions, and she'll get to the bottom of that when we return after this break. Welcome back to the program. I'm talking to our legal analyst, Terry Austin. She is based there in the New York City area. And Terry, you have such an extensive background in law. And I wanted to talk to you about the prison release program. We've talked about this before, and in this age of the coronavirus, one of the concerns that many people have voiced, particularly as it relates to the prison population, is how do we help them and protect them, since they're in such confined quarters? And arguably, what do you do to show them compassion and to help them?
There are 177,000 federal prisoners, and many of them are from the Black and Brown communities. And so this release program that was just implemented at the end of March does state that those individuals who are at risk, and that's defined by the CDC. So older people and individuals who have health problems, they should be released early. And there are several criteria for this release. One of the criteria is that you cannot be imprisoned for a violent crime, and you can't be imprisoned for a sexual offense. So those make sense. But here's the catch. There is a computer-generated algorithm, and it's called Pattern. And under this algorithm, if there are repeat offenses like low-level drug offenses, those prisoners are going to be deemed risky. And even the Department of Justice's own statistics state that only 7% of Black men will be released under this program, compared to 30% of Caucasian men who will be released under the program. So the algorithm itself works against Black and brown men. And we know that historically, more of the minority community is in prison because of the war on drugs historically. So it's going to have an adverse impact.
That almost leaves me speechless, and I think rightfully indignant, because most of these offenses that we're talking about are non-violent offenses. I realize that drugs is a scourge upon our society, but we have disproportionately impacted the lives of so many African American men. And so my question to you as a follow-up to that is, legally, what can we do? And what does this say about the criminal justice reform that the Trump administration has touted in providing a better understanding of the sentences that have been harsh? That's the delicate way of describing it.
That's exactly right. You know, what we are doing under the First Step program and under this program for early release is very similar. They are both using the same pattern algorithm. So even though it's been wonderful that we have this First Step program and now this subsequent program to early release because of the COVID-19, obviously those are good things. But what we are talking about is the fact that it's really not helping the minority community as much as we thought it might. So what we can do legally, you know, you have a right to safety and to health, even if you are in the prison system. And so what inmates can do is, from a constitutional standpoint, if you do not want to fear for your life and be subjected to COVID-19, you absolutely can claim under the 8th Amendment, under the Constitution, that this is cruel and unusual punishment. And I'm going to add one thing. William Barr actually initially said that you had to have completed 50% of your sentence. And then somehow there was a miscommunication with the Prison Bureau. Well, many people were put in this 2-week quarantine so they could ultimately be released. And then they were told, no, you are not going to be released. So it really put them through some strenuous stress, and they could claim that that's cruel and unusual.
Yeah, even to the point of getting them some PPE, which is so hard to acquire at this point. And when we come back, Terry, I'm holding you over for one more second. We're going to talk about what the Congressional Black Caucus has been able to help in terms of getting important equipment to people, and also how to help increase the stimulus package so that it affects and helps and benefits small business owners who happen to be African American or people of color. We'll be back with a moment with our legal analyst, Terry Austin. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the program. We're ending our legal analysis right now with Terry Austin because we want to talk about, on this ending note, something that could be very pivotal in helping minority business owners. Terry, as you know, the CBC has been instrumental in helping to get this $480+ billion package passed. And in that, they're talking about PPE. They're also talking about how to help small minority-owned businesses, which would be men and women of color. So how does this work, and how can minority communities finally step up to the table and take advantage of it, because they missed it before, and it wasn't due to them not trying?
That's exactly right. And so what we really need to do, this additional package, you're right, the Congressional Black Caucus really did step up to the plate, work on making sure there were additional provisions that will help the small businesses. What they need to do is apply now and get the documentation ready. The bill is probably going to be effective as of this week, but be ready to have your documents in place. One of the things that they can do is use a bank that they have a relationship with. So while the credit criteria has been relaxed to a certain extent, the banks will still have to do a due diligence. So if you use a bank that you've had a relationship with, the process will go a bit faster. You have to also make sure that you are applying for this loan only for payroll, utilities, the rent that you have to pay, and the mortgage that you have to pay. And this is important because you don't have to repay 8 weeks for these types of expenses. You can apply for up to 10 million, but you don't have to repay 8 weeks of those types of expenses. If in fact you use the expenses for something else, you will have to repay. And not only that, they can come after you for fraud. So you have to be very careful. If you can, you should not commingle the funds. But if you have to commingle the funds, just make sure you document so that no one can claim that you're using these funds inappropriately. The other thing that I would add there is, you know, there are other pockets of money. There's this emergency loan that you can get for disasters, EIDL, and the CBC actually made sure that that was in the CARES package. So you can look for other types of release under the CARES package beyond just this $484 million.
Yeah, you had stated the CDC. Did you mean the CBC or the CDC?
CBC, yes, the Congressional Black Caucus.
All right.
Yes, absolutely. They worked hard to make sure that that was in the bill.
Good, good. And Terry, on that note, I can't let you go without talking about the state of Georgia. Now, as you know, other states have opened, but what happened in Georgia with the governor, Governor Kemp, deciding to reopen the state of Georgia in a measured way before going full on reopening of that state. There are a lot of African-American leaders in the state of Georgia who are saying, wait a minute, this is too soon, too fast. Why didn't you allow more time before doing this? Because they're legitimately concerned. Now, there are some who support the governor, but there is a lot of discord right now that has been sown because of the governor making this decision without perhaps consulting African-American leaders throughout the state of Georgia. Atlanta being the most populous, DeKalb County being the second most affluent Black community in the nation, following Prince George's County in the Maryland area. What legal remedy do they have to a governor's executive order about reopening businesses, particularly parlors and massage places, and deeming these as essential places to operate business?
Well, you've hit on a really important question. If governors, like we're seeing in Georgia, are saying that businesses may reopen and local municipalities don't think that that is wise, it is really up to people. And it's interesting when you think about Congress passing laws, when you think about the president invoking these executive orders, or you think about the Supreme Court. A law is only as good as the people's will to obey the law. Justice Breyer actually wrote a book, How Our Democracies Work. And the fact is, if the people do not want to follow the law, they do not have to. Going all the way back to Dred Scott, which decided that people who are African American are property and not citizens. Some would say that that led to the Civil War. Here today, you know, if you have a governor saying you may open your business, but people don't want to go to that business because they are afraid, then that executive order or that governor's statement or guidance is going to have no effect. There have already been surveys and studies done. Open Table, for instance, did a survey showing that there had not been a provision saying you have to lock down, but people weren't going to restaurants even before the lockdown. So you can tell a state like Georgia, you may open these massage parlors or nail salons, but the people are not going to want to go until they are reassured that there's some safety mechanism in place. So from a legal perspective, honestly, the local municipalities don't really need to do much. All they have to do is basically guide their people and explain, this is what the facts show. And until the facts show that there's a decrease in infection rate, decrease in death rate, and until we can prove that you are protected, you have to decide whether you want to go. So that's what I would do from the perspective of the local municipality who doesn't want to endanger their own people.
Well, thank you for sounding the legal alarm for all of us as it pertains to all of the topics we've discussed about immigration, prisoner release, the stimulus package, as well as what's happening in Georgia and other states that are following suit. Terry, always good to have you. Terry, you have been a great legal analyst. Continue to keep on bringing us more details. We appreciate you so much. Terry Austin, our legal analyst for the Kelly Wright Show. And we're back with more of the program after this. Welcome back to the program. So my next guest is someone I am delighted to introduce to you. Many of you may know her. She is Kelsey Scott, quite an actor, and she is doing a lot of work. But as you can imagine, we're all being impacted by COVID-19, including the members of our theatrical community, our Hollywood community. So from Broadway to Hollywood, Kelsey, people are just kind of shut down. Yeah. And yet we're seeing the resiliency that the people have, and you're no exception to that. What are you doing to go through this COVID-19 pandemic?
It definitely depends on the day. Some days I am very productive. Other days I'm really interested in what new recipe I'm going to try. But in general, I'm trying to kind of keep up with work. I'm trying to create some content. There's certainly things that on behind the scenes I have in development. So put in the time and the work, because we can still do calls and we can still do Zoom. And so it's not a complete work stoppage. We just can't be on set, you know.
Are you at liberty to talk about any of those projects that you're developing?
I can speak generally. How about that? I'll tell you about the two that I'm most excited about. Some years ago, I optioned the rights to a book that I just really fell in love with the characters and the storyline, and have been working for some years to really kind of get it off the ground. And so it finally looks like we've got some momentum, and we're developing it as a television series. I can tell you the book. It's Getting Hers by Donna Hill, and just an amazing set of characters, a built-in fan base, because she actually ended up doing some sequels, but I'm very excited about that project. And then kind of a project that got regenerated. The other half of my resume is as a screenwriter. And many years ago, I was hired to write a screenplay, and then I was writing it for a production company. That production company, the partners ended up splitting, and then their property ended up kind of just being on a shelf somewhere. And I came back to one of the producers and said, you know, I know in a work for hire scenario, you do the work and then you walk away because you have no rights to it. But I could not get the story out of my head, and we'd had it set up, and then that fell through, the nature of the business. But luckily I was able to come to an agreement with the producer to kind of get it back and start shopping it myself with a couple of producing partners. And so those are the two that are really kind of moving. And so I'm trying to use this time to make sure that once we are doing the in-person meetings and such again, that I'm ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah, it sounds like you're preparing for all of that. That's something that we all should learn from, how we should look at this time that we have with our families, or this time that we have alone, to actually keep planning for that day that we will return to some sense of normalcy. But yet we don't know what that new normal will look like. Let me ask you about some of your past participations in shows, like, for example, How to Get Away with Murder. What was it like playing in that role, and with that great ensemble of actors?
That is my favorite television role to
Is
do.
it really?
Yeah, it is. It's funny because someone asked me that question yesterday. They were like, "What's your favorite role?" I said, "Well, I've got a different favorite for each medium, but for television, definitely How to Get Away." Just because there are a number of reasons. But first, the character is so unlike me, and that's fun to stretch yourself and to step outside of your comfort zone and to take some risks. And so it was a lot of fun to find her, to embody her, and because I had the opportunity to portray her on multiple episodes, to grow her, because oftentimes when you're a guest star on a show, it's a one-off, or maybe you get a couple, but the opportunity to really kind of dig into her character and really discover who she was, so much fun. And then always fun working with Viola. She's,
Yeah.
I mean, she's amazing. And so the opportunity to share the screen with her, to share that artistic air, yeah, definitely one of my favorite experiences.
Yeah, an experience that you will likely treasure.
Mm.
Let's go back to the movies.
Okay.
12 Years a Slave.
Mm.
I had the pleasure of meeting Solomon Northrup's family, some of
Mm.
his descendants here in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area, and they couldn't stop talking about the movie enough, or about just the legacy that he left.
Yeah.
What did you learn from that, participating in that movie?
The first thing I learned is that you never know how something you do is going to touch people.
Yeah.
We, I think, I think it's fair to say that we all felt it was a special story, that we all felt it was a special project, but you never know how that's going to resonate with an audience. You could be alone in your opinion. And with such a large cast, most of us didn't actually share the screen with each other, so it was kind of compartmentalized. There are some people I didn't meet. In fact, I didn't meet Brad Pitt until the night of the Oscars. So you just kind of never know how all of it is going to come together. And I think that the greatest legacy of that particular project was not even all of the accolades. I mean, listen, the accolades are nice, but I think that it managed to start conversations that people don't typically begin with each other, or different people of different backgrounds don't necessarily enter into intentionally. And it got people talking. And I think that that's what is special about art, is its tendency to begin and to initiate and to compel people to speak to each other, to try to see each other's perspectives. And I think that that was the greatest legacy of that film, that we started a conversation that was long overdue.
Well, stay with me. When we come back with more of the Kelly Wright Show, we'll have more of Kelsey Scott, and we'll talk about how she became who she is today. We'll explore some of that back in the. Welcome back to the program. So I'm having a delightful conversation with Kelsey Scott. Many of you know her. She is quite a talented lady, an actor, and she keeps giving great performances that make us think and make us react. And that's what good actors do. I want to talk about Kelsey Scott, the person, though.
Okay.
Where are you from? How did you get involved in this wonderful profession that you're shining like a star?
Well, thank you. First of all, that's very kind. I'm from Atlanta, born and raised. My upbringing was kind of in the arts. I think very early on, the ham in me challenged my mother's patience, and she was looking for a positive outlet for all of that energy, and it happened to be the stage. And so I got started pretty early. I think my first bona fide theater performance was at 6. I started working in the theater scene in Atlanta, the Alliance Theater and Jumanji Productions and 7 and 1 and Youth Ensemble of Atlanta and kind of all of that. You know, my life was extracurricular long before even the schooling began. And then it just stuck. I never thought of it as a career. I mean, it was just fun and fulfilling, and I couldn't get enough of it. And I have dipped in and out over the years. I mean, I was pretty involved as a youngster, and then I went to performing arts high school, and then I kind of stopped the in front of the camera thing to go to school. I got my bachelor in broadcast journalism from Florida A&M, and then a master's in film from Florida State, and then came out here and was kind of doing more of the behind the scenes when I first moved to LA. And I just missed acting. I missed the stage, I missed the screen, and found a way to come back on both sides so that I could be a screenwriter, so I could create some worlds, and then an actor so that I could create some worlds differently.
And you know, it makes you versatile and valuable because you can go on both sides of the camera and do so much good work and explore so many possibilities. Before I go, I just want to ask you, in this age of coronavirus and the pandemic and the fact that it has targeted our community, and not that it's actually targeting it, but our community because of our health disparities, we've experienced some dire situations within the African American community due to coronavirus. And it will likely, these disparities will likely continue well beyond. How do you, from your vantage point as an actor, as a screenwriter, as someone who's interpreting what's going on and dealing with the times, how do you see your role beyond the screen, beyond the writing of a movie or a production? How do you see yourself helping other African Americans understand that we can get through this and we have to deal with the disparities that we have?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. There are a couple of answers to that. Some on the artistic side and some on what the arts allow. Artistically, I think that the idea that in this time that we're kind of having to stay within four walls, so to speak, people are understanding even more the importance of the arts, because what are you turning to? You're turning to television, you're turning to theater that's being broadcast. You know, there's so many people who politically didn't find a reason to support the arts, and now that's what they're leaning into. So I think that one, it's about acknowledging the importance of what the arts provide. Now, on a non-artistic level, I think it's a responsibility of ours to now use that visibility to get that message across to as many people as possible. Not the message of the importance of the arts, but the idea that we can take the eyeballs that are on us and speak to those disparities and speak to the healthy choices to make and the right choices to make that will keep us all healthy and get us out of this as quickly as possible. So sometimes just for the reason that we're out there, people will listen to us more. And if they will, then we have to make sure that we are delivering the right message, something that eventually brings us all together as a healthy society. So I think that's a responsibility you have when people listen to you.
Kelsey Scott, I'm listening to you loud and clear. Thank you for being on the Wright Show, and God bless you in all of your endeavors. And don't be a stranger. You can always.
I will not. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure meeting you.
All right. Thank you. God bless. We're back with more of the show after this. Welcome back to the program. So I smile a lot because I enjoy life and I enjoy the gifts that God gives us. And I love seeing people use their gifts for great opportunities and things that they can do to help others. And my good friend, Keith Childress, is joining me now. And Keith is one of those individuals who puts his music where his heart is. It's from his soul, it's from his brain, it's from his body, it's from his heart. Keith, thanks for being on the program today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure indeed.
And it looks like you're in San Francisco, but that's your backdrop because you're
Yeah.
actually in.
Being that I'm not that technical, I was trying to go get it off because I went to see I'm in my classroom at Grace Brethren Christian School in Clinton, Maryland. Shout out, I love this place. I come here every day during this pandemic, you know, because we can't go many places. So I come to my classroom, I miss my students and my school, the people I work with. I love it here. So I'm here every day.
I appreciate you, man, so much. And your new project actually drops tomorrow.
Yes.
And what's the name of the project?
The main song, It's Not Over. It's an EP, so it's about 6 songs on it, and they will bless your life. It's not over. And you'll see on the video, there's a video as well, but it's going to be on all platforms, on Spotify, on iTunes, on Amazon, on all the online platforms. Please go get it.
Run and tell that. You know, you mentioned Hope for the World, and it just jogged something in my memory about a radio show that I used to do many years ago in the Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Virginia area called Hope for the World.
Wow.
You know, that was 30-something years ago.
Yeah, I was probably a baby. Yeah.
Just a baby then.
Yeah.
But in full disclosure, Keith and I have known each other for a number of years. We're both graduates of Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where we learned quite early and often while we were in school. I was ahead of him. I'll be kind. We learned how to expect a miracle and something good is going to happen to you. And even in the midst of this COVID-19, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your music. So when we come back, we're going to share your song. And the name of the song again is called?
Oh, It's Gonna Be All Right. I was thinking about the other song so much, I forgot. It's Gonna Be All Right. You better believe it.
Welcome back to the program, and now for my final word. This is Friday. It's the beginning of the weekend. And I'm reminded of how weeks ago, before this coronavirus became the global pandemic that it is today, how we would spend our weekends planning what we're going to do, the weekend getaways. Well, now the weekend getaways are being spent at home. So maybe it's time just to hug your family, your loved ones closely, those that you're able to touch. Maybe it's time to pick up the phone and call friends and have some quarantining. And while we do not know the future yet, we do understand that we have today. So take this moment to not live in fear, but to live in love, freedom, and peace. We'll leave you now with Keith Childress and his song, It's Gonna Be All Right. Have a great weekend, everybody. Peace out.
So that means if it's all right, it's gonna be all right. And just take these words with you and let it bless your life. Know that God's on your side. Sing it, girls. Come on, y'all.
It's gonna be all right. It's gonna be all right. Favor is on your side. God will make time to
It's gonna be all right.
It's gonna be all right. Trust him and do not fear. No matter what your eyes see. No matter what your
It's gonna be all right.
It's gonna be
It's
all
gonna
right.
be all right.
It's gonna be
Favor is on your side. God will make darkness light. It's gonna be all right.
It's gonna be all
Tonight,
right.
tonight.
Trust him and do not fear.
Hey,
No matter what your eyes see. No matter what your needs
all
be.
right.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Knock it off.